Often overshadowed by his more famous predecessors, James Monroe stands as a pivotal figure in early American history.
He took a bullet for America at 18, became friends with every founding father, and died broke on the 4th of July. This is the forgotten story of James Monroe. The making of a revolutionary 1758-1783, April 28, 1758. Westmoreland County, Virginia. The same county that gave birth to George Washington and Robert E. Lee. A baby boy enters the world in a modest wooden farmhouse, crying his first breath into the humid southern air. His name is James Monroe. Nobody knows it yet, but this child will witness the birth of a nation, befriend every single founding father, serve under 4 presidents, and become the 5th himself. But right now, he's just another farmer's son in colonial Virginia. James's father, Spence Monroe, is a middling planter. Not wealthy enough to be a Virginia aristocrat, not poor enough to struggle. They own land, they own slaves. Young James grows up in that peculiar world of colonial Virginia, where liberty and slavery exist side by side, where men speak of rights while denying them to others. This contradiction will haunt his entire political career. Here's what most people don't know about Monroe's childhood. He was orphaned young. By age 16, both his parents are dead. But unlike many orphans, James has an uncle. Thomas Jones, his mother's brother, becomes his guardian. And here's where Monroe's luck turns. Jones isn't just any uncle. He's wealthy, educated, and connected. He sees potential in young James. 1774, 16-year-old James Monroe arrives at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, the colonial capital of Virginia. Picture this: cobblestone streets, elegant Georgian buildings, taverns buzzing with revolutionary talk. This isn't just any college. This is where Thomas Jefferson studied, where future leaders debate philosophy and politics late into the night. Monroe walks these same halls, reads the same books. He's studying law, classical literature, mathematics. But something else is happening in Williamsburg. Something that will change everything. Stop. Imagine being a teenage student when your entire world is about to explode. News travels slowly in 1774, but when it arrives, it's explosive. The Boston Tea Party. The British closing Boston Harbor. The intolerable acts. In Williamsburg's taverns and college halls, young men aren't just discussing theory anymore. They're planning revolution. Monroe is 17 years old. He should be focused on finishing his degree. Instead, he's drilling with a militia company. He's breaking into the governor's palace with other students, stealing 200 muskets and 300 swords from the British armory. This is his first act of rebellion. It won't be his last. Here's the crucial moment that changes Monroe's life. June 1775. His uncle Thomas Jones dies, leaving James a small inheritance and 800 acres of land. Most young men would use this to secure their future, build a comfortable life. Monroe makes a different choice. He drops out of college and joins the Continental Army. No degree, no completed education, just a rifle and a belief in something bigger than himself. September 1775. Lieutenant James Monroe, 3rd Virginia Regiment. He's 18 years old. Around him, the Continental Army is a chaotic mess. These aren't professional soldiers. They're farmers, merchants, blacksmiths, students. Many don't have proper uniforms, some don't have shoes, but they have something the British don't expect. They're fighting for their own land. Monroe quickly proves himself. He's disciplined, intelligent, brave. His commanders notice. By 1776, he's promoted to captain. And then comes the moment that will define him forever. December 25, 1776. Christmas night, the Delaware River. Picture this, it's freezing. Literally freezing. Ice chunks flow down the river. Snow falls in thick curtains. General George Washington has made a desperate decision. Cross the Delaware River in the middle of the night, attack the Hessian garrison at Trenton, New Jersey, or watch the revolution die. Captain James Monroe is in one of those boats. 18 years old, crossing an ice-choked river in darkness. If they're spotted, they're dead. If they capsize, they're dead. If this attack fails, the revolution is over. What would you do? You're 18. You could die in the next few hours. Would you get in that boat? They make it across. Dawn breaks on December 26th. The Hessians are caught completely off guard. The Americans pour into Trenton, attacking from multiple directions. It's chaos, musket fire, shouting. Soldiers running through snowy streets. Monroe is leading an advance unit. They're targeting Hessian artillery positions. If the enemy gets those cannons operational, the Americans will be slaughtered. Monroe runs forward, sword drawn, rallying his men. And then, a musket ball tears through his left shoulder, severing an artery. Monroe drops. Blood pours from the wound, steaming in the cold air. This is it. This is how Captain James Monroe dies at 18 years old on a frozen street in New Jersey. But fate has other plans. Dr. John Riker, a local physician, happens to be nearby. He rushes to Monroe, presses his fingers directly into the wound, pinches off the severed artery. Monroe is unconscious from blood loss. Right there in the street, while the battle rages around them, Dr. Riker saves his life. Without this random act of medical skill, there is no President Monroe, no Monroe Doctrine. The entire course of American history changes because one doctor was in the right place at the right time. Monroe survives, but his recovery is long and painful. The wound never fully heals. For the rest of his life, the next 55 years, he'll carry that scar. A permanent reminder of the price of liberty. For his bravery at Trenton, Monroe is promoted to major. He's 19 years old. While recovering, he catches the attention of someone who will change his life forever. George Washington himself. Washington sees something in young Monroe. Courage, yes, but also intelligence and discipline. He appoints Monroe as an aide-de-camp, essentially a military assistant. This means Monroe spends the next months in close proximity to the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. He's watching Washington make decisions, learning strategy, seeing leadership up close. But Monroe isn't content being an aide. He wants to fight. He petitions for a field command, and that's when he meets the man who will become his mentor, his father figure, his political guide, Thomas Jefferson. Remember that name, Thomas Jefferson. Because the relationship between Jefferson and Monroe will shape American politics for the next 40 years. 1780 Monroe is 22, back in Virginia, frustrated. He wants a military command, but there are too many officers and not enough positions. He needs a new path. Thomas Jefferson, then governor of Virginia, takes Monroe under his wing. Not just as a protege, Jefferson becomes almost a surrogate father to the young man who lost his parents. Jefferson tells Monroe, "Study law with me. Learn politics. The war will end, but the new nation will need leaders who understand governance, not just warfare." Monroe agrees. He studies law in Jefferson's library, debates philosophy and government with one of the greatest minds of the age. This is his real education, more valuable than anything he could have learned at William and Mary. Here's what this relationship reveals about Monroe's character. He's a learner. He's not the most brilliant of the founders. He's not the most eloquent. Jefferson is smarter. Madison is a better theorist. Hamilton is more dynamic. But Monroe has something else. He's persistent, loyal, and he knows how to learn from the best. This quality will carry him further than raw genius ever could. The Rise of a Politician, 1783-1811. 1783, the Revolutionary War ends. America has won its independence. Monroe is 25 years old. He's a war hero with a bullet scar to prove it. He owns land. He has connections to the most powerful men in the new nation. His future looks bright. But now comes the harder question. What kind of nation will America become? Monroe returns to Virginia. He's admitted to the bar. He's officially a lawyer now, but he doesn't practice much law. He's interested in something bigger, politics. The question consuming everyone is how to organize this new country. Under the Articles of Confederation, America is barely holding together. Each state acts almost like its own country. There's no strong central government, no president, no unified army or currency. Monroe enters politics in 1782, elected to the Virginia House of Delegates. He's 24. Within a year, he's elected to the Congress of the Confederation, the national government such as it is. At 25, Monroe is one of the youngest members of Congress, and this is where he makes his first major impact. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Most Americans have never heard of it, but it's one of the most important laws ever passed. Here's what happened. America suddenly owns all this land west of the Appalachian Mountains, stretching to the Mississippi River. The question is, what do we do with it? Some want to sell it to wealthy speculators. Others want existing states to claim it. Monroe helps draft a different vision. This land should be divided into new territories, which will eventually become new states equal to the original 13. Not colonies, not second-class territories, but equal states. This is revolutionary. The Roman Empire kept conquered territories as provinces. The British kept colonies. America will do something different. Grow by adding equal partners. Monroe is instrumental in this idea. It's how America expands from 13 states to 50 without empire. Think about it. Without this decision, there's no Ohio, New Indiana, New Illinois, New Wisconsin, no Michigan as equal states. The entire shape of America changes. 1787, the Constitutional Convention meets in Philadelphia to draft a new constitution. Monroe isn't there. He's not one of the delegates. But he's watching carefully from Virginia, and he has concerns. When the proposed constitution is revealed, Monroe is skeptical. It creates a strong federal government, too strong, in his view. Where are the protections for individual rights? What stops this new government from becoming as tyrannical as the British king they just overthrew? Monroe sides with the anti-federalists. Not because he's against union, but because he believes in limiting federal power. He wants a Bill of Rights. He wants states to retain significant authority. At Virginia's ratifying convention in 1788, Monroe opposes the Constitution. He's on the losing side. Virginia ratifies it, but Monroe's concerns are heard. The promise of a Bill of Rights helps swing enough votes. When the first Congress meets in 1789, they immediately draft those 10 amendments. Monroe's opposition actually strengthens the final document. This reveals something crucial about Monroe's political style. He's willing to lose battles to win wars. He'll compromise. He'll work with people he disagrees with. This flexibility will serve him well. But 1786 brings something more important than politics: love. Monroe is in New York on congressional business. At a social gathering, he meets Elizabeth Cartwright. She's beautiful, cultured, from a wealthy Loyalist family. Her father actually supported the British during the war. It's an unlikely match. Monroe is a revolutionary hero. She's the daughter of a Tory, but they fall for each other hard. They marry in February 1786. Monroe is 28. Elizabeth is 18. By all accounts, it's a genuine love match. They'll stay married for 44 years, until his death. Elizabeth is intelligent, dignified, and becomes his closest advisor. She's also intensely private, which means history knows less about her than other first ladies. But make no mistake, behind Monroe's success is a strong partnership with Elizabeth. Their marriage teaches us something about Monroe's character. He's not driven by social climbing. Elizabeth's family lost much of their wealth supporting the British. Monroe doesn't marry her for money or connections. He marries for love. In an era when marriages among the elite are often strategic alliances, this is notable. It shows Monroe has personal integrity, that he follows his heart even when it's politically inconvenient. 1790 Virginia appoints Monroe to the U.S. Senate. He's 32 years old. Now he's in the inner circle of American power. President George Washington is establishing precedents for the new government. Alexander Hamilton is Secretary of the Treasury, pushing for a strong federal financial system. Thomas Jefferson is Secretary of State, advocating for agricultural interests and state rights. Monroe aligns with Jefferson and James Madison. They're forming what will become the Democratic-Republican Party, in opposition to Hamilton's Federalists. This is the beginning of the American two-party system, and Monroe is there at the creation. As a senator, Monroe is quiet but effective. He's not a great orator like Patrick Henry. He doesn't write brilliant treatises like Madison, but he works hard, understands details, builds relationships. His colleagues respect him. Here's the pattern you need to see. Monroe is always in the room where it happens. Not always the star, not always the leader, but always present, always learning, always contributing. Then comes 1794, and Monroe faces his first major test in foreign policy. The French Revolution has turned bloody. France and Britain are at war. America is caught in the middle. We have a treaty with France from the Revolution, but we also need trade with Britain. President Washington needs a skilled diplomat to navigate these treacherous waters. He appoints James Monroe as minister to France. Monroe is 36 years old, and he's about to make the biggest mistake of his career. Monroe arrives in Paris in 1794. The French Revolution is in its radical phase. The guillotine is busy. The Jacobins are in power. It's chaos, but Monroe is genuinely sympathetic to the French cause. After all, France helped America win independence. He sees the French Revolution as an extension of the American Revolution. At his first official appearance, Monroe gives a speech praising the French Revolution and embracing the revolutionary government. He's enthusiastic, passionate, genuine. There's just one problem. This directly contradicts Washington's policy of neutrality. Washington is furious. The president is trying to keep America out of the European war. Monroe's speech makes it seem like America is taking France's side. This is a diplomatic disaster. To make matters worse, Monroe isn't kept informed about other American negotiations. John Jay is simultaneously in London negotiating a treaty with Britain, the Jay Treaty, that the French see as a betrayal. Monroe learns about the Jay Treaty from French officials, not from his own government. He's humiliated. When the treaty is signed, France sees it as America choosing Britain over them, and Monroe, their supposed friend, knew nothing about it. His position becomes impossible. In 1796, Washington recalls Monroe. It's essentially a firing. Monroe returns to Virginia, embarrassed and angry. His first major diplomatic mission is a failure. His relationship with Washington, his former commander, his hero, is damaged beyond repair. Many political careers would end here. Monroe's is just getting started. Monroe does what any scorned politician does. He writes a book. A view of the conduct of the executive is his defense, his explanation, his attack on the Washington administration. It's 500 pages of Monroe arguing he was right and Washington was wrong. Publishing it is a mistake. You don't attack George Washington in 1797 and come out ahead. The book damages Monroe's reputation among Federalists, who now see him as disloyal. But it strengthens his standing with Jefferson's Democratic Republicans, who appreciate someone willing to stand up to Federalist policies. What would you do? Your hero, your mentor, the greatest man in America, has fired you. Do you stay quiet or fight back? Monroe chooses to fight. It's costly, but it's honest. But Virginia still believes in Monroe. In 1799, he's elected governor of Virginia. He serves 3 one-year terms. As governor, he's competent but not spectacular. He improves infrastructure, balances budgets, navigates the complex politics of the largest state in the Union. Then comes 1800, and everything changes. August 1800, Gabriel's Rebellion. An enslaved blacksmith named Gabriel Prosser organizes what would have been one of the largest slave rebellions in American history. The plan: gather 1,000 enslaved people, march on Richmond, take the capital, and force the state to negotiate for freedom. The rebellion never happens. A massive thunderstorm prevents the gathering. 2 slaves inform on the plot. Gabriel is captured. Governor Monroe faces a terrible decision. 26 enslaved people are convicted of conspiracy. The question is, what punishment? Monroe is genuinely conflicted. He's a slaveholder himself, But he's read the Enlightenment philosophers. He believes in natural rights. He knows slavery is wrong, even if he can't bring himself to give up his own slaves. He consults with Jefferson. They discuss deporting the rebels rather than executing them. Maybe to Sierra Leone, maybe to Spanish territory. In the end, Monroe allows 26 executions. He does try to limit the bloodshed, preventing mass retaliatory killings, but 26 human beings die on his watch. It's one of the darkest moments of his career, and it reveals the fundamental contradiction at the heart of the Founding Fathers. They spoke of liberty while enforcing slavery. Monroe will never resolve this contradiction, neither will his generation. It will take a civil war 60 years later to finally address what Monroe and his contemporaries failed to confront. Diplomat and Dealmaker, 1803-1811-1800, the most important election in American history. Thomas Jefferson defeats John Adams. It's the first peaceful transfer of power from one political party to another in American history. The Democratic Republicans are in charge now, and they remember their friends. 1803 Monroe is 44 years old. He's finished his terms as governor. He's planning to practice law, make some money, pay off debts. Then a letter arrives from President Jefferson. It changes everything. Jefferson needs Monroe for a secret mission to France. It's about New Orleans. Here's the situation. Spain owns Louisiana, the vast territory from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains. But Spain is weak, and Napoleon has forced them to secretly cede Louisiana back to France. This is a disaster for America. New Orleans controls access to the Mississippi River. American farmers need that port to ship their crops. If Napoleon holds New Orleans, he could strangle American commerce. Jefferson sends James Monroe to Paris with a simple mission: buy New Orleans. Congress has authorized up to $10 million. Don't spend it all, but get that port. Monroe sails to France. He's joining Robert Livingston, the American minister already in Paris. When Monroe arrives in April 1803, he expects tough negotiations. Instead, he walks into the deal of the century. Napoleon's Caribbean adventure has failed. Yellow fever killed his army in Haiti. He's about to go to war with Britain again and needs money fast. Livingston has been negotiating, but getting nowhere. Then Monroe arrives, and suddenly, everything changes. The French foreign minister makes an astonishing offer. What would you pay for all of Louisiana? Not just New Orleans. The entire territory, 828,000 square miles, from the Mississippi to the Rockies, from the Gulf of Mexico to Canada. Monroe and Livingston look at each other. They have authority to spend $10 million on a port city. They're being offered half a continent. What do? They have no way to contact Jefferson. Communication takes months. If they wait for instructions, the offer might disappear. Napoleon might change his mind. Britain might intervene. Imagine this moment. You're James Monroe. You have authorization to spend $10 million. You're being offered something worth billions, but it costs $15 million. You'll exceed your authority. You might get fired again, but you'll double the size of your country. What do? Monroe makes the decision. Buy it. Buy all of it. April 30th, 1803. The Louisiana Purchase Treaty is signed. $15 million for 828,000 square miles. It works out to about 3 cents per acre. It's the greatest real estate deal in history. Monroe exceeds his authority. He spends more than authorized, but when news reaches America, the nation goes wild with celebration. Jefferson is thrilled. Congress quickly appropriates the extra money. The Senate ratifies the treaty. In one bold move, America has doubled in size. The country now stretches from the Atlantic to the Rockies. There's room for expansion, for settlement, for growth. The Louisiana Purchase guarantees America will become a continental power. And James Monroe made it happen. Here's why this matters. Without the Louisiana Purchase, there's no American West as we know it. No St. Louis, no Kansas City, no Denver. The entire heartland of America doesn't exist as American territory. France or Spain might hold it. Or it might become independent nations. The Louisiana Purchase doesn't just add land, it ensures America has the space to become a superpower. And it reveals something crucial about Monroe: when the moment demands it, he can make big, bold decisions. He's not reckless, but he's not timid either. He's willing to take calculated risks for enormous rewards. His reward: Jefferson sends him to London as minister to Britain. Monroe now has to negotiate with America's most difficult diplomatic partner. Remember, we fought a revolution against Britain just 20 years ago. The British still resent it. They're impressing American sailors, kidnapping them off ships and forcing them into the Royal Navy. They're interfering with American trade. Monroe works on a treaty to resolve these issues. He negotiates for months. In 1806, he and William Pinckney sign a treaty with Britain. It's inadequate. It doesn't stop impressment. Jefferson refuses to even submit it to the Senate. Monroe is disappointed again. His diplomatic efforts are rejected again, but he doesn't quit. He stays in London, keeps negotiating, keeps building relationships. From 1803 to 1807, Monroe is America's man in Europe, shuttling between Paris and London, managing America's most important foreign relationships. 1807, Monroe returns to Virginia. He's 49 years old. He's been in public service almost continuously since age 18. He's negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. He's served in Congress, the Senate, as governor, as a diplomat to two major powers. He's personally close to Jefferson and Madison. Surely the presidency is within reach. But remember, politics is never straightforward, and Monroe is about to learn a painful lesson about ambition and friendship. 1808, Jefferson is retiring after 2 terms. The Democratic Republicans need a new candidate. Monroe wants it. He believes he's earned it. But Jefferson and Madison have other plans. They support Madison for president. Monroe is expected to step aside. He refuses. He challenges Madison, allowing a faction of Democratic Republicans to nominate him. It's a doomed effort. Madison wins easily. Monroe gets almost no support. It's humiliating. His friendship with Madison is strained. Jefferson is disappointed in him. Monroe has violated the unwritten rule: don't challenge your friends. For the next few years, Monroe is on the outside. He returns to Virginia, practices law, manages his plantation. He's deeply in debt, a chronic problem for Monroe, who never focuses enough on money. He and Elizabeth lived modestly compared to other Virginia planters. He's 50 years old. His political career seems over. But here's the thing about James Monroe: he doesn't give up, and he doesn't hold grudges forever. By 1810, he and Madison are reconciling. Monroe accepts that Madison is president. Madison recognizes that Monroe is too valuable to keep in the wilderness. They need each other. In 1811, Madison offers Monroe the position of Secretary of State. It's the most important cabinet position, the traditional stepping stone to the presidency. Monroe accepts. He's back in the game just in time for war. The war years 1811-1817. 1811, America is sliding toward war with Britain again. The issues that Monroe tried to negotiate in London are still unresolved. Britain is still impressing American sailors. British ships are still harassing American merchant vessels. And now there's a new problem. Britain is arming Native American tribes in the Northwest Territory, encouraging them to resist American expansion. Warhawks in Congress, led by Henry Clay and John Calhoun, are pushing for war. They want to invade Canada. They want to finally break British power in North America. They want to prove America is truly independent. Secretary of State James Monroe is in the middle of it all, trying to negotiate while preparing for conflict. June 18, 1812, Congress declares war on Britain. America is fighting the world's greatest naval power. This seems insane. The British Navy has over 600 ships. America has fewer than 20. Britain has been fighting Napoleon for years. They're experienced, battle-hardened. America's army is small, poorly trained, poorly supplied. This should be a disaster, and at first it is. The War of 1812 starts badly. American invasions of Canada fail miserably. The British blockade the American coast. American trade collapses. The federal government is nearly bankrupt. New England Federalists openly discuss secession. The nation is coming apart. Monroe is Secretary of State, dealing with diplomatic aspects of the war. But in 1814, everything changes. Secretary of War John Armstrong is incompetent. American military leadership is a mess. Madison needs someone he trusts absolutely. August 1814. A British fleet sails up Chesapeake Bay. They're heading for Washington, D.C., the capital is virtually undefended. Monroe personally rides out to scout British positions. He's 56 years old, riding through Maryland, gathering intelligence like a young soldier. He sends urgent messages. The British are coming. Defend Washington. But the preparations are inadequate. The militia is poorly organized. When British troops land and march toward the capital, the American defense crumbles. August 24, 1814. The Battle of Bladensburg, just outside Washington. Monroe is there, trying to organize the defense. He's not a military commander, but he's the senior government official present. The British attack. The American militia breaks and runs. It's called the Bladensburg Races because the Americans flee so fast. Monroe gallops back to Washington. He warns Madison. The British are coming. The government evacuates. Dolly Madison saves George Washington's portrait from the White House just before British troops arrive. That night, British soldiers burn Washington. The Capitol building burns. The White House burns. The Library of Congress burns. The young nation's capital is destroyed. It's the lowest point in American history since Valley Forge. Monroe works through the night, trying to organize a defense. He helps evacuate government documents. He coordinates with military commanders. He doesn't sleep for days. Picture this. You're a founding father. You fought in the Revolution. You negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. And now you're watching your capital burn. Your life's work seems to be ending in flames. How do you keep going? Monroe keeps going because that's who he is. He doesn't give up. He doesn't panic. He's seen worse bleeding in the snow at Trenton, starving at Valley Forge. This is bad, but America has survived worse. And something remarkable happens. The British burning of Washington backfires. Instead of demoralizing Americans, it enrages them. The nation rallies. Recruitment increases. The militia becomes more determined. September 13th to 14th, 1814. The British attack Baltimore. Fort McHenry guards the harbor. For 25 hours, British ships bombard the fort. Francis Scott Key watches from a ship, wondering if the fort will fall. At dawn, the American flag still flies. The fort holds. Key writes a poem, The Star-Spangled Banner. Baltimore doesn't fall. The British retreat. The tide is turning. Monroe works tirelessly as Secretary of War, reorganizing the military, coordinating defenses, planning strategy. He's not a military genius like Napoleon, but he's competent, organized, and tireless. Under his leadership, the American military improves dramatically. December 24, 1814. In Ghent, Belgium, American and British negotiators sign a peace treaty. The War of 1812 is over. It's essentially a draw. Neither side gains territory. The original issues aren't really resolved, but America has survived. The nation has proven it can defend itself against the world's greatest power. News of the treaty takes weeks to reach America. Before it arrives, one more battle happens. January 8, 1815, New Orleans. Andrew Jackson's army destroys a British force in a stunning victory. Over 2,000 British casualties, fewer than 100 American. It's the most lopsided victory of the war. The timing is ironic. The battle happens after the peace treaty is signed. But Americans don't know that yet. When they hear about New Orleans, then hear about the peace treaty, they assume Jackson's victory won the war. It's not true, but it's what people believe. Jackson becomes a national hero. Monroe, who actually managed the war effort for a year, gets less credit. But he doesn't mind. The war is over. America has survived. That's what matters. The War of 1812 changes America. Before the war, the nation's survival is in doubt. Many Americans still identify more with their state than with the nation. After the war, American nationalism surges. People are proud to be American. The Federalist Party, which opposed the war, collapses. The Democratic Republicans dominate, and James Monroe is positioned perfectly. He's been Secretary of State and Secretary of War. He managed the government through its darkest crisis. He's proven his competence, his loyalty, his steadiness. In 1816, the Democratic Republicans nominate him for president. He wins easily, defeating Rufus King, 183 electoral votes to 34. On March 4, 1817, James Monroe becomes the 5th President of the United States. He's 58 years old. He's the last president who is a founding father, the last who fought in the Revolution. He still carries the bullet scar from Trenton in his shoulder. The Era of Good Feelings, 1817 to 1825, March 4, 1817. Washington, D.C. has been rebuilt after the British burned it. The new Capitol building isn't finished, so Monroe takes the oath of office outdoors, the first president to do so. A huge crowd attends, over 8,000 people. The weather is beautiful. Monroe's inaugural address sets the tone for his presidency. He speaks of national unity, of moving beyond partisan divisions. He talks about America's growing strength and bright future. He's optimistic, confident, presidential. A Boston newspaper, the Columbian Sentinel, will later describe Monroe's presidency as the era of good feelings. The name sticks. It captures something real. After years of partisan warfare, after a devastating war with Britain, America is united like never before. But maintaining that unity will be Monroe's greatest challenge. Monroe does something unprecedented. He tours the country. No president has done this before. In the summer of 1817, just months after taking office, Monroe travels through New England, visiting former Federalist strongholds that opposed him and the war. This is brilliant politics. Monroe is saying, "I'm president of all Americans, not just Democratic Republicans." He wears a Revolutionary War officer's uniform on the tour, reminding everyone he's a veteran, a patriot who bled for independence. In Boston, the heart of Federalist opposition, he's received like a hero. Former political enemies toast him at dinners. The partisan warfare of the past seems to be ending. Monroe's tour continues. He visits battlefields, military installations, colleges, factories. He's assessing the nation's condition, but also unifying it through his presence. Everywhere he goes, crowds turn out. People want to see this last founding father, this living link to Washington and Jefferson. Back in Washington, Monroe assembles one of the strongest cabinets in American history. John Quincy Adams as Secretary of State, brilliant, experienced, the son of John Adams. William Crawford as Secretary of Treasury, competent, popular. John C. Calhoun as Secretary of War, young, energetic, a fierce intellect. These men don't all like each other. They're rivals. They all want to be president after Monroe. But Monroe manages them brilliantly. He lets them debate, lets them argue, then makes the final decision. He's not threatened by strong personalities. He's confident enough to surround himself with ambitious, talented people. Monroe's first major crisis, Florida. Spain owns Florida, but barely. It's a lawless territory where escaped slaves find refuge, where Native American tribes launch raids into Georgia and Alabama, where pirates operate freely. Americans want Florida, and they're getting impatient. General Andrew Jackson is on the border with orders to stop raids. Jackson interprets these orders, creatively. 1818, Jackson invades Spanish Florida with 3,000 troops. He captures Spanish forts. He executes to British citizens he accuses of inciting Native Americans. He essentially conquers Florida without authorization. When news reaches Washington, Monroe's cabinet explodes. This is an act of war against Spain. It could bring Britain into the conflict. Jackson has exceeded his orders catastrophically. Most of the cabinet wants Jackson court-martialed. Monroe faces a decision. Condemn Jackson and risk his own popularity. Jackson is a war hero. Or support Jackson and risk war with Spain and Britain. Monroe finds a third path. He doesn't court-martial Jackson, but he doesn't fully endorse him either. He returns the captured Spanish Fort C, when not conquering Florida. But he tells Spain, "Look what happened. You can't control Florida. Either you govern it properly, or we'll have to take it for security reasons." It's a masterclass in diplomacy. Monroe is essentially saying, "We didn't authorize this, but it proves a point. Your territory is unstable. That's unacceptable." Monroe gets Florida without firing a shot, without officially firing a shot. He expands American territory again, and he does it through a combination of military pressure and diplomatic skill. The Louisiana Purchase made him. The Florida acquisition confirms his talent for territorial expansion. By 1819, America has grown enormously. The Louisiana Purchase doubled the nation. Florida extends control over the entire East Coast. The country stretches from the Atlantic to the Rockies, from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. Under Monroe's leadership, America is becoming a continental power, but this expansion brings a crisis that threatens to tear the nation apart. 1819 Missouri Territory applies for statehood, should be routine, but it's not, because Missouri wants to enter as a slave state. This opens a wound that's been festering since the founding. Slavery. Here's the situation. America has 11 free states and 11 slave states. Perfect balance. Each section has equal representation in the Senate. If Missouri enters as a slave state, the balance tips to the South. Northern congressmen are furious. They propose an amendment. Missouri can enter, but slavery must be gradually abolished there. Southern congressmen are equally furious. They argue the Constitution protects property rights, including slave property. Congress cannot dictate to a state whether it allows slavery. The debate becomes vicious. For 2 years, Congress argues the nation is paralyzed. Some talk of disunion, of splitting into separate countries. Monroe does what he's always done, he compromises. Working with Speaker of the House Henry Clay, Monroe supports what becomes known as the Missouri Compromise of 1820. Missouri enters as a slave state. Maine, previously part of Massachusetts, enters as a free state, balance maintained. Slavery is prohibited in the Louisiana Territory north of the 3630 parallel, except Missouri. It's a solution that satisfies no one, but that everyone can live with. Anti-slavery Northerners hate that Missouri enters with slavery. Pro-slavery Southerners hate that future expansion of slavery is limited. But the Union holds together. Monroe signs the compromise into law. He believes he's solved the slavery problem, or at least postponed it. He's wrong. This is a temporary fix. The poison of slavery will continue spreading through the nation's bloodstream. In 40 years, it will kill 600,000 Americans in civil war. But in 1820, Monroe believes he's preserved the Union, and for now, he has. Thomas Jefferson, Monroe's mentor, now 80 years old, writes about the Missouri Compromise. This momentous question, like a fire bell in the night, awakened and filled me with terror. I considered it at once as the knell of the Union. Jefferson sees what Monroe perhaps doesn't want to see. This compromise doesn't solve anything. It just postpones the inevitable crisis. But Jefferson is retired, dying, broke. Monroe is president, in power, trying to hold a nation together. November 1820. Monroe runs for re-election. He faces no serious opposition. The Federalist Party is dead. The Democratic Republicans are the only national party. Monroe wins every single electoral vote except one 231 out of 232. One elector votes for John Quincy Adams, supposedly so that only Washington would have the honor of a unanimous electoral college. But Monroe's greatest achievement is still to come. European powers, particularly the Holy Alliance, Russia, Prussia, Austria, are alarmed. They've spent years putting down revolutions in Europe. They're discussing helping Spain reconquer its American colonies. Britain is also concerned, but for different reasons. Britain wants to trade with independent Latin American nations. The British Foreign Secretary proposes that Britain and America issue a joint declaration. European powers should stay out of the Americas. This lands on Monroe's desk in 1823. What should America do? Monroe consults his advisors. He writes to Jefferson and Madison, both retired, but still trusted counselors. The debates are intense. John Quincy Adams argues passionately, America should act alone, not as Britain's junior partner. America should declare its own policy, not hide behind British naval power. Adams drafts language that Monroe refines. The result is a message to Congress in December 1823 that will change American foreign policy forever. December 2, 1823. Monroe's 7th annual message to Congress. Buried in this routine address is a series of statements that will become known as the Monroe Doctrine. Read that again. Monroe, president of a country that's barely 40 years old, that was burned by the British just 9 years ago, is telling the great powers of Europe to stay out of an entire hemisphere. This is audacious. America doesn't have the military power to enforce this doctrine. The British Navy is actually doing the enforcing. Britain also wants to keep European powers out of Latin America for trade reasons. But Monroe is claiming this as American policy, American authority. At the time, many Europeans laugh at the Monroe Doctrine. America can't back up these bold words. But Monroe and Adams are playing a long game. They're establishing a principle that will grow in importance as America grows in power. And they're right. The Monroe Doctrine becomes a cornerstone of American foreign policy. It's invoked during the Civil War to keep European powers from supporting the Confederacy. It's invoked in the 1890s to support Cuban independence from Spain. It's invoked in the 20th century to justify American intervention throughout Latin America. For better and worsened, there's plenty of both. The Monroe Doctrine shapes American foreign policy for 2 centuries. It's James Monroe's most lasting legacy, the policy that bears his name. 1824, Monroe's final year as president. He's 66 years old. He's served 8 years as president, after decades in other offices. He's tired. He's also broke. Monroe has never been good with money. He's spent his life in public service, which doesn't pay well. He's neglected his plantation. He's loaned money to friends who never repaid him. He's spent his own funds on government expenses that Congress never reimbursed. He owns land but has little cash. As his presidency ends, Monroe faces a decision that reveals his character one more time. The 1824 election is chaos. With the Federalist Party gone, everyone is a Democratic Republican, which means party unity is an illusion. For candidates run John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, William Crawford, and Henry Clay. All are experienced, qualified, ambitious. Monroe refuses to endorse anyone. He's staying neutral. He won't use his influence to pick his successor. He believes the people and their representatives should decide. The election is decided in the House of Representatives when no candidate gets an electoral majority. Adams becomes president in what Jackson's supporters call a corrupt bargain. Monroe stays out of it entirely. On March 4, 1825, Monroe attends Adams's inauguration. He watches his successor take the oath. Then James Monroe, 5th President of the United States, returns to Virginia, a private citizen for the first time in decades. He's exhausted, he's accomplished, he's broke. The final years 1825, 1831. Monroe retires to Oak Hill, his estate in Virginia. It's beautiful rolling hills, forests, peace. But it's expensive to maintain, and Monroe has no money. He's land-rich and cash-poor, like many Virginia planters. He tries to get compensation from Congress for expenses he incurred during public service money he spent from his own pocket that was never reimbursed. He submits careful documentation, receipts, ledgers, explanations. He's asking for about $60,000, a legitimate claim for decades of unreimbursed expenses. Congress debates. Some support Monroe, others are skeptical. The process drags on for years. Monroe, the man who negotiated the Louisiana Purchase and Florida, has to beg Congress for money he's legitimately owed. He tries writing his memoirs, hoping to make money from book sales. But Monroe is not a gifted writer. His prose is dense, legal, boring. The memoir project stalls. Besides, Monroe is increasingly sick. Age and old wounds are catching up with him. This is the reality of founding a nation. History remembers the glorious moments, signing the Declaration, winning battles, negotiating treaties. It forgets the tedious aftermath: unpaid bills, chronic pain, financial struggles. 1830, Elizabeth Monroe, his wife of 44 years, dies. James is devastated. She's been his partner through everything: the Revolution, the diplomatic missions, the presidency. She managed their household, raised their daughters, endured criticism of her private nature as First Lady. Now she's gone. Monroe is 72 years old, sick, broke, and alone. His daughters live elsewhere with their own families. Oak Hill is too expensive to maintain without Elizabeth managing it. Monroe faces reality. He has to leave Virginia. July 1830. Monroe sells Oak Hill. He moves to New York City to live with his younger daughter, Maria, and her husband, Samuel Gouverneur. It's a practical decision, but it must hurt. Monroe is a Virginian. He fought for Virginia. He served Virginia. Now he's leaving, essentially a refugee from debt. In New York, Monroe lives quietly in his daughter's house. He's mostly forgotten by the public. Young Americans know Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, Daniel Webster. Monroe is a relic from an earlier era, but he's not completely forgotten. Some still remember. In 1824, the Marquis de Lafayette had visited America, his grand return tour, celebrating his Revolutionary War service. Monroe, still president, had welcomed his old comrade. They're the same age, both in their 60s, both veterans of the Revolution. They embraced as old soldiers do, remembering battles and fallen friends. Now, in 1831, Monroe is dying, but he's not bitter. He's lived an extraordinary life. He fought in the Revolution, knew every founding father, helped expand America from the Atlantic to the Rockies, established principles that will guide the nation for centuries. July 4, 1831. Independence Day. The 55th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. James Monroe lies in bed in his daughter's house in New York City. He's 73 years old. His body is failing. The bullet wound from Trenton, 55 years old, still aches. He's lucid but weak. Outside, New York City celebrates Independence Day. Parades, speeches, fireworks. Inside, James Monroe is dying. Stop and realize what's happening. The last president who fought in the Revolution, who knew Washington and Jefferson personally, who shaped the young nation, is dying on the exact day America declared independence. James Monroe dies at 3:15 p.m. on July 4, 1831. He's the third president to die on July 4th. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both died on July 4, 1826, exactly 50 years after the Declaration of Independence. Within hours of each other. Now Monroe dies on July 4th, 5 years later. Monroe's funeral is held in New York City. Former President John Quincy Adams attends. Political leaders make speeches. But the turnout is modest. Monroe isn't forgotten, but he's not celebrated like Washington or Jefferson. He's the last of a generation, and that generation is passing. Monroe is buried in New York City, in the Governor family vault. He stays there for 27 years. But Virginia doesn't forget its son. 1858, the Virginia legislature votes to bring Monroe home. His body is exhumed and transported to Richmond. On July 5, 1858, one day after the anniversary of his death, James Monroe is reinterred in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond, Virginia. Thousands attend. Speeches are made. Cannons fire. Monroe is finally home, buried among other Virginia heroes. 3 years later, Virginia secedes from the Union. The Civil War begins. The nation, Monroe, worked his entire life to preserve, tears itself apart over the issue he and his generation failed to resolve: slavery. The legacy. What is James Monroe's legacy? He's not remembered like Washington, the father of the nation. Not like Jefferson, the philosopher-president. Not like Lincoln, who saved the Union. Monroe is the forgotten founder. The president whose achievements are massive but whose personality is modest. But consider what he accomplished. At 18, He took a bullet for American independence. That bullet scar stayed with him for 55 years, a permanent reminder that freedom has a price. He learned from the best. Jefferson, Washington, Madison, Monroe studied under all of them. He wasn't the most brilliant, but he was the most persistent. He absorbed their wisdom and applied it throughout his career. He negotiated the Louisiana Purchase. Along with Livingston, Monroe doubled America's size in one bold move. Every state from Louisiana to Montana exists as American territory because Monroe made a decision in Paris in 1803. He acquired Florida. Monroe expanded America's southern border, secured the Gulf Coast, and eliminated a source of instability. He did it through a combination of military pressure and diplomatic skill. He preserved the Union. The Missouri Compromise postponed the Civil War by 40 years. It didn't solve the slavery problem. Nothing short of war would, but it bought time for the nation to grow stronger before facing its existential crisis. He established the Monroe Doctrine. For better and worse, Monroe's foreign policy declaration shaped American engagement with the world for 2 centuries. It defined the Western Hemisphere as America's sphere of influence. He unified the nation. The era of good feelings wasn't just propaganda. Under Monroe, partisan divisions diminished, national identity strengthened, and America became more unified than ever before. But here's the uncomfortable truth Monroe forces us to confront. He did all this while owning slaves. He spoke of liberty while denying it to others. He fought for American independence while keeping human beings in bondage. Monroe owned between 75 and 250 enslaved people throughout his life. Depending on the year and his financial circumstances, when he died, his estate included enslaved people who were sold to pay his debts. He wasn't the worst slaveholder. He didn't brutally whip slaves or break up families as a matter of course. He sometimes expressed moral discomfort with slavery. He supported colonization, sending freed slaves to Africa as a supposed solution. But none of this matters. He still owned human beings. He still bought and sold people. He still benefited from their forced labor. He still enforced a system of racial oppression. This is the central tragedy of the founding generation. They created a nation based on liberty and equality while denying both to millions. Monroe, like Washington and Jefferson and Madison, lived this contradiction daily. He knew it was wrong. He did it anyway. We can't ignore this. Any honest assessment of Monroe must include it. He was a great American statesman and a slaveholder. Both things are true. The first doesn't excuse the second. Monroe's America was a nation of contradictions. It was a democracy that denied voting rights to most people. It preached equality while enforcing slavery. It spoke of liberty while conquering Native American lands. The America we have today, with all its flaws and continuing struggles, has spent 2.5 centuries trying to fulfill the promise those contradictions betrayed. The Civil War, Reconstruction, the Civil Rights Movement, ongoing fights for equality, all of it stems from the founders' failure to fully embrace their own principles. So why should we remember James Monroe? Because he shows us that history is made by flawed human beings. Not gods, not perfect heroes, but people who make mistakes, who contradict themselves, who do great things while failing in other ways. Monroe wasn't the most brilliant founder. That was Jefferson or Madison. He wasn't the greatest military leader. That was Washington. He wasn't the most eloquent. That was dozens of others. But Monroe was persistent. He was loyal. He was steady. He learned from his failures. He built relationships. He compromised when necessary. He made bold decisions when required. He served his country for over 50 years, from the Revolution to the presidency. Through war and peace, through triumph and disaster. The Louisiana Purchase gave America room to grow into a continental power, then a global superpower. Without that vast interior, without the resources and space it provided, America wouldn't be America. Monroe made that possible. The Missouri Compromise bought time 40 years before the Civil War. That time allowed the North to industrialize, to grow in population, to develop the strength to eventually defeat the Confederacy. If the Civil War had come in 1820 instead of 1860, the outcome might have been different. Monroe's compromise, inadequate as it was, may have inadvertently saved the Union. James Monroe died broke. The man who negotiated the greatest real estate deal in history died in debt. The president who oversaw an era of good feelings died almost forgotten. But he died knowing he had served. He had fought for independence. He had helped shape the nation. He had expanded its boundaries. He had preserved its unity, at least for his time. Think about the scope of his life. Born in 1758, when America was a collection of British colonies. Died in 1831, when America stretched from the Atlantic to the Rockies, when railroads were beginning to connect distant cities, when the Industrial Revolution was transforming the nation. The America James Monroe helped create is imperfect. It was built on compromises with evil slavery, Native American removal, inequality. Monroe participated in these evils. We can't forget that, but it was also built on genuine principles: liberty, self-government, the rule of law, the idea that people can govern themselves. Monroe believed in these principles. He fought for them. He bled for them. The America we have today is still trying to fulfill those principles, still trying to extend liberty and equality to everyone, still trying to become the nation the founders claimed they were creating. That work continues. Monroe's generation started it, but didn't finish it. Their children didn't finish it. Neither have we. Each generation inherits the work incomplete and adds what it can. James Monroe once said, "National honor is national property of the highest value." But perhaps his most telling statement was simpler. A little flattery will support a man through great fatigue. That last one reveals something. Monroe had a sense of humor about himself. He knew he wasn't the most glamorous figure. He knew he was doing grinding, unglamorous work, but he did it anyway, sustained by small moments of recognition and encouragement. On July 4, 1831, as James Monroe lay dying in his daughter's house in New York City, did he reflect on his life? Did he think about that Christmas night crossing the Delaware? About negotiating with Napoleon's ministers in Paris? About watching Washington burn? About the faces of the enslaved people on his plantation whose freedom he never granted? We don't know. Monroe left no detailed diary of his final thoughts. He wasn't sentimental or introspective in his writings. His final words, reportedly, were to his daughter. "I regret that I should leave you in distressed circumstances." Even dying, Monroe worried about others. Even in his last moments, he felt he hadn't done enough. That was James Monroe. Never quite satisfied with his accomplishments, always feeling he could do more, always serving. He took a bullet for America at 18. He's been waiting 55 years to finally rest. On July 4, 1831, he finally does. James Monroe, 1758 to 1831, Revolutionary War soldier, diplomat, senator, governor, Secretary of State, Secretary of War, 5th President of the United States, last of the Founding Fathers. National honor is the national property of the highest value.